Meaghan Timko, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Gradual Behavioral Health. Meaghan has more than 25 years of experience in applied behavior analysis. Before joining SPCN as an advisor, she founded Parallel, a neurodiversity consulting practice focused on advising families navigating the transition into adulthood. She's the author of the Amazon bestselling book, The Roadmap Lab, and has led projects at Emory University Autism Center. She continues to work with families around the globe on best practices for inclusion and transition planning. So Meaghan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
For sure. So just to start off, can you tell me about your background in ABA and your studies? I think you told me you were at Florida or Florida State or one of those two.
Yes, Florida State. I would like to be very specific about that. Go Noles. And so while my work in this field preceded my time at Florida State by a decade, my studies in ABA started there. They had at the time one of the only ABA programs. And so happenstance had me there doing my schooling, and I had already previously worked in the field when I was in high school, all the way going back to middle school. And so the journey led me through, serendipity to a place where I could actually get a degree in the thing I had already been doing and wanting to do. So that was in 1999 I started, and I've just never stopped.
Wow, that's great. You said you worked in middle school even. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so when I was in middle school, I had a very unfortunate incident that took me out of being able to be in PE. And our middle school at the time, and I mean, this is, early on, this is in 1994, and we had the demonstration classroom for our entire county for special needs. And they said, well, since you can't go to PE, you're going to go into this classroom and be a peer mentor. And I'll be very honest, at the time, I was very socially aware, and I said, this is going to be horrible for my popularity to do this. And they put me in there anyway, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I ended up peer mentoring, but honestly, it was a two-way relationship, becoming very close with a boy named Nick. And he ended up going all the way through high school with me. And it just inspired me to stay in this career year over year, decade over decade.
Amazing, amazing. Well, so about sort of that's the past of ABA and your background. So, one thing I want to talk about is sort of the future of ABA. Our last conversation we had, where we talked, we talked about sort of things that are going on in the industry right now, and I just wanted to get your perspective on the future of ABA. So, what do you think maybe the best version of ABA looks like in 10 years?
Gosh, I think it's going to go back to the beginning. And I've had this conversation so much recently. For those of us that were in the original cohort of ABA and behavior analysts, we learned in a very analog environment, right? Everything we did was by pen and paper. Everything we did was highly relational. Everything we did was person to person. We weren't focus solely on unit metrics and a P&L. And while those things are important because we have a for-profit health structure in our country, it wasn't necessarily the thing we were focused on in the beginning. I would like to think we went quality first. And then, I think a lot of people are familiar with the story. We went on, we found out this was a really good intervention for individuals. Then over time, insurances started covering it. And then all of a sudden you had the current boom. And in that current boom, what became the sort of navigator instead of quality was quantity. How do we increase unit metrics? How do we have the biggest P&L so that we can sell for the biggest multiple? And again, while all of those things can be a part of the conversation in a country where we have for-profit healthcare, how do you weave quality back into the conversation? And so I think in the next 10 years, we're going to have a decade of reckoning, maybe not a whole decade of reckoning. We're going to have a moment of reckoning where we say, what does the next decade look like? And hopefully it centers back to a balance of, while we need to make this profitable, there needs to be quality. You cannot just have people running around chasing money with no mind for quality care.
Got it. Yeah, about that, you mentioned the field It used to be different. It started off in homes and schools, and then shifted towards clinics after some insurance mandates. So do you see the pendulum swinging back towards the community-based and naturalistic approaches?
I think so. I think there will be room for both because there are certainly clinical cases for both settings. But I do think we shifted away for a moment into how do we get everybody in one room and do the most work. And that's not always the answer. If you have a child who doesn't want to go to the clinic or a family who needs to learn how to be a good caregiver support network because they need to watch things happen, or if behavior happens in the home, these are all cases for, hey, we need to do this in a home environment. Um, I've seen a strange thing where the clinical setting is saying it has to start here, it must start here, and it must start X amount of hours per week. And to me, that's not very prescriptive of what a child needs. It's prescriptive of what a business needs. And so, what I hope is we see a flip-flop of what does the child need? What is the quality that we require? And where is the environment that this should be happening? Oh, hold on just a
Got it.
moment. Decline that really quickly. Sorry about that. Um,
Sure.
so, that's what I hope is we start leading with the things that used to lead this conversation and have a better place at the table with quality, with what the child and the family needs and what's appropriate.
Right. Got it. Thank you for that. So about best practices, how do you think about family involvement in therapy? So is the field right now, do you think there's a lot going on with training and support for parents as active participants, or is there maybe a lot of just kind of drop off in the clinic? And can you talk about that?
I've seen that. So, as you know, I was there. I took some time away from clinical practice to work at Emory, and while I was there, this boom of insurance happened. And so, before that, we assumed the family was part of the care. What happened in these few years is that the family was quickly taken out of the equation some of the time, sometimes most of the time, depending on where you were and who the owner of the company was. You cannot generalize results if you don't have the family as part of the treatment team. If it's just one RBT, one BCBA, and one child, that's where the treatment will stay, is with that small little team. When you bring in the collaborators who are important in that child's landscape of care, that's when you start to generalize out things that they learn in therapy. So they're not just should they be on the team, they have to be on the team for this to work. And so if you encounter a group that says we don't do parent training, that's probably a good sign that that's a red flag, not for you.
Got it. Yeah, I think a lot of times, the parent training is something that is clear on their website or in their materials. So, a lot of practices right now are advertising that as something that they
Mhm.
offer, which I think is a good thing. So you've worked with children, across the age spectrum. Are there particular windows in a child's development where the right ABA support makes an outsized difference?
Yeah, when you have little ones, you'll definitely see faster acquisition of skills. And I think most behavior analysts would agree with that. But ABA is effective throughout the lifespan. We aren't, contrary to popular belief, this isn't just a science that's applicable to individuals with autism. My undergraduate degree, while it focused on ABA, I actually did it in performance management. And so basically behavior analysis in the business world. So these methods are universal because human behavior is human behavior. Now, when you take it and you apply it to autism, you have a lot of control. So you can see fast results, you can see measurable results because you don't have somebody that's telling you, no, I'm not going to do this. But it's interesting you asked this question. Somebody to me today said, well, ABA doesn't work with middle schoolers and high schoolers, which is categorically not true. What happens is as somebody ages into adolescence and adulthood and they gain their voice, they can say no. And you have to pivot how you utilize your strategies to get that person on board with what you're doing. Reinforcement is how we all learn. Punishment is how we're all consequated to do things that we don't want to do. It's not just restricted to 4-year-olds with severe autism. And so if anybody, any provider or any practitioner tells you ABA doesn't work for older people, my oldest client was 79 years old. 79.
Wow. Yeah, I mean I've seen there's more like even retirement communities that offer it. I've seen some. So yeah, I think that goes along with what you're saying. There's no real age limit. But there does seem to be a trend where it's younger children that are in ABA. Do you think that's um maybe changing a little bit?
Well, there's going to be mandates that make that change within policy reform. So, for instance, here in Georgia, we have a policy change coming up on July 1st. And within that is a mandate that if you have over a certain number of BCBAs, you're required to take on cases with a certain level of complexity, translation, older kids. And so, whether people like it or not, you're not going to be able to just take 4-year-olds with 40 hours a week. That's going to come to an end, and by the hands of the people who created the current situation. But the good news is again, ABA still works outside of that window. And so this isn't, to me, terrible news. I think for people who set up an entire business model on having 94-year-olds in a clinic for 40 hours a week, this is probably a little bit of a punch to the gut, but they'll have to pivot.
Yeah, well, I mean, your book, I think, focuses on the transition to adulthood, the Roadmap Lab. So maybe parents aren't always thinking that far ahead when they get the autism diagnosis, but maybe that's something like they could be thinking about. What would you say to a parent of a 5-year-old who might not have that long-term view right now?
In my earlier practice, it wasn't something that I really thought about, but the longer I practiced and that time that I spent at Emory and, with Parallel, it really helped me understand the lifespan and the consequences of a lack of early intervention. The worst phone call I get with Parallel is from a parent who is facing their own mortality, who has an adult child in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. And they say, we never did anything. We don't know what to do. Can you make him or her fill in the blank? Go to work, get a job, learn how to do this, learn how to do that. And while these strategies are effective throughout the lifespan, they get harder and it takes more time as time goes on, especially when you start to pull in the variables you have no control over. Like for instance, if you get a call from someone and the person has never, ever spent the night in their own home before, and a parent, and this is a real call I got, by the way, and a parent says, I have a sickness, I have so much time left on this earth, can you teach them to live alone? That's a hard thing to face. You have so much time when you have a newly diagnosed child to teach them the things that are going to give them the most opportunity in adulthood. And if you don't
Right.
look at it that way, you're losing time at the end of a journey you're not even thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, you've been practicing for a long time. There's a lot of maybe some people now are kind of saying, well, maybe ABA isn't really very good. There's some naysayers out there that are against it, even in the autism community. Do you think, like, what would you say to them? Because that's a very specific example of a child where, well, they're a grown up and maybe they could have benefited from ABA.
Mhm.
So what would you say to that?
I get that. I have to deal with that still. And because I practiced for so long, and I'm very fortunate that the mentors that I had and the teachers that I had taught me the most amazing way to practice, I acknowledge that not everybody was given that benefit. I mean, I had the pillars of the field as my teachers and as my thesis supervisors, and so everybody didn't have that. But,
Yeah.
you know, acknowledging that some people have done some things that are not great, we don't throw a whole field out, mine or any field, just because there was a handful of bad practitioners, right? There are bad doctors. We don't throw out the practice of medicine. There are bad speech language pathologists. We don't throw that whole field out. What we do know is that evidence shows is that ABA is the most effective way to gain skills and mitigate some of the things that come along with an autism diagnosis. I think when I talk to parents who tell me what you just said, which is ABA is bad, and I heard this about ABA, what I offer to them is I I can't make you love this. I can't make you want to do this. But what I will share with you is that if your child doesn't learn X, Y, Z, then this is what it looks like at 20. This is what it looks like at 30. This is what it looks like at 40. So if you want to let them choose their path and they keep choosing not to learn that, how will you deal with their opportunity when it's this big versus this big when they're an adult?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we think about a lot. We talked about a lot in the special needs care network team is, uh, the independence of adults when the parents pass away. And so, yeah, that's a really key point. I think maybe a lot of people don't think about it until it's too late.
Yeah, they really don't. And, I vacillate between do I scare people or do I not scare people about this? But the
Right.
more calls I get and I have that parent in a crisis moment, the more I feel like it's my obligation to tell people. And, at least sort of they've been warned or they've been explained how this can impact them later on. Because what you don't want is to be in a place where you don't, as a parent, you don't have a plan, you don't have earning potential in your own life left, and your son or daughter does not fit in a placement. What do you do then? And the answer is you kind of freak out. And so if the requirements of the place that you have in your head for your child are XYZ and they don't meet those requirements for a beautiful living situation, that place is not obligated to take your child. And so if they require them to be able to sleep on their own, if they require them to be able to manage their own medication, to refrain from engaging in behaviors, and they have social requirements, and your child doesn't have them, they're simply going to tell you no.
Right.
So early intervention is the time. Middle school can still be the time. High school can
Okay.
still be the time to do all those things.
So the sooner the better,
Oh my gosh,
basically.
yes. I mean, they touch. Transition planning and ABA kind of like meet in the middle, where ABA is sort of how do we get these skills on track and get them going. And then you start launching into that transition plan of, okay, we've learned as much as we can learn. Now we have a learner who wants to learn, who can learn from their environment. What's the best place for them? What offers the most opportunity for them?
Okay. So a parent gets an autism diagnosis for their kiddo. What are the first couple things a parent should look for? Whether they're looking for ABA, they're like, okay, well, or someone tells them that they should get ABA, maybe a doctor.
Mhm.
What would they look for before they, you know, put their kid into a program?
I mean, I am a team approach person. And so this is where my work at Gradual and my work at Parallel come together. You need more than one. You need more than just ABA. You need more than just a really compassionate pediatrician. You need respite care. You need to make sure that you and your spouse or the other caregiver in your life are on the same page about everything, because this is a long road. This takes a lot of time and attention, and it takes a ton of teamwork to do it the right way. And so I had a parent call the other day actually at Gradual, and she said it to me, and I was like, oh, yes, I love this kind of mom. She's like, I have this, I have this, I have this, I have this. And she's like, you're one of the pieces, ABA. And I'm like, yes, we are a piece. You need so many other things. And she had lined all of that up. And so what I would say is the team approach, the collaborative team approach is the most important thing from the time you get the diagnosis all the way up until you are transitioning your child as an adult into whatever setting they're going into, and just keeping an open mind that sometimes those team members come and go. Schools come and go, teachers come and go, therapists come and go, but it's kind of a pliable thing that you have to keep an eye on at all times.
Yeah. So the team approach, really having multiple team members who are involved and on the mission.
Mhm.
Um, is there anything that parents should look for? Like, maybe they are looking at in-home where a provider or therapist comes to their home, or they go to a clinic. Um, or is there anything else that maybe like is a red flag or something that parents should look out for?
Anybody who comes to you and says your kid needs 40 hours a week, if that's the first sentence out of a provider's mouth, don't do it.
Right. Billing. Billing. Okay.
I mean,
Gotcha.
there are like caveats
Um,
to that, Eric. I mean, like
yeah,
there are a handful of times where that is appropriate. That is the extreme minority. And so your child should be spending time exposed to social play, to school. Your child should be exposed to the community because the longer you wait to do those things, the harder they become. And so maybe it's 20 or 25 hours a week of ABA when they're little, and 5 hours a week of a play group, and 5 hours a week of, I don't know, like horses. And, like there's all these things you can do, whatever, wherever you are, geographically, it'll kind of dictate what you should be pulling or what you even have access to. But a community to me, facing out towards everything in the community is the best. Like, don't stop going out. Don't not go to restaurants. Don't find that place that says it's okay that you come in, even though your kid might be throwing food on the floor. Like, say yes to the outings. Say yes to keeping your kid part of the community because the more walled in that you get, the harder it becomes later on.
awesome. Okay, last question. What's one piece of advice you'd give to a parent who just got an autism diagnosis?
The one piece of advice I would say is, gosh, one piece. Um, I would say before you go on everything I just said, because it can be a lot of information, what I just said, is take a minute. Like, just take a minute, put the report down, stop Googling, get out of the Reddit chat rooms, because I know that's where everybody starts. And it's a fire hose of information. And just take a breath and center yourself because it's almost like being on an airplane and the little thing says put your own oxygen mask on first. You have to do that. If you do not do that and you're over here with your kid, you're going to fall apart. And so I would say that is step one is you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. You mentioned the Reddit forums. I think sometimes when you go online, it's just the negative stuff. So
Oh gosh,
maybe,
yeah.
going with your own experience. Yeah, I mean, your own experience can be more valuable than sometimes just reading the internet
Yes.
stuff. Well, thank you so much, Megan. It was a pleasure to have you as an advisor at Special Needs Care Network. Really glad to have you.
Yes, thanks for having me and thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah, stop.